Welcome. Today we will talk about a very interesting topic in political science, and that is development. Now if we look onto a very simple phenomena of understanding a difference between growth and development, I can say growth can be assessed as positive or negative. However, when I talk about development, it's always a kind of progressive thought that occurs. So it's a kind of directional growth that could be explained, and it's much beyond a mere economic perspective. So a holistic perspective of a society, a holistic development, social development embarked with economic development. So focusing more on the quality of life, and there is where we talk about human development index. So in this lecture, we would focus upon what is development, what are the various models of development, and the alternative approach to development. So if I talk about society, it's similar to a kind of students which are deciding for what kind of school magazine it should be. So they focus on what they want in the form of content, what they want in the form of information, in the form of graphics, what all themes they want to cover. So similarly for a society, when we say development, it's a people's idea how they want the society to be. So we can either follow a kind of mechanical model that is there, that has been given by our ancestors, we could say. So this is what the development is, and this is what we have to follow. Or we can have a much broader perspective where we can implement and develop our own policies. So be it a kind of democratic form of government or a dictatorial form of government, both of these forms of government, they have their own vision for development. And then when I say they have their own vision for development, that means in a dictatorial society, there would be certain rules that would be laid forward, and those have to be obeyed and followed, and that's for the development indeed. However, in a democratic form of government, we can see it's more of people's participation that's there. So people come up with ideas, programs, policies, and then try to implement it. So in both the case, development does happen. And that's one of the paramount concepts that you need to understand. So simply put, development is a progressive thought with a directional growth that is there, and the idea is a better life quality or a better quality of life. Now in a society, what do we understand? We have a vision for the society, how it progresses as a whole, and what best we need to achieve from this society. However, in this process, we do have some limited goals, which could be in the form of the rate of economic growth that takes place or the modernization of the society that takes place. But there are definitely developmental priorities that we take into account, and when we have certain developmental priorities with us, we focus on to achieving those goals by completing the targets that are being laid down. Let's say you have a target to double the farmer's income by 2022. So what are you trying to do is, you are trying to lay down a path forward to achieve that goal, to complete that project, and that is what we say is a development. But whenever we say development, this development is not independent. It comes with numerous challenges. Let's talk about the independence movement. So be it the independence movement related to Asia, related to Africa, all these countries which were under the colonial control for a long have a kind of impoverished life that was seen. A very low standard of living was seen. And as soon as they gained their independence, what became the major priority? The major priority was indeed to take the country out of the issues of poverty, malnourishment, unemployment, job front, illiteracy, a lack of basic amenities that are there. So all these things became the major priority. And for these, it was believed that the countries which were well off were already at a better margins than the countries who were gaining the independence. So whenever we say the countries who were fighting for independence movement, who were trying to get out of the colonial control, were trying to use their resources only for their national interest, and all the policy formulation was related to the betterment of the national policies or the national development, we could say. So there were various stages of development that were marked. For these, the goals of development were laid down. The most important idea was firstly to modernize, secondly to bring in industrialization, thirdly with this industrialization there was automatically seen which was urbanization, and state was one of the agencies that was considered to bring about the change with the loan or with the form of development that could be seen in. In India, we had the 5-year plans that came immediately after the independence, and during this 5-year plan, we saw huge HEP projects being built, hydroelectric power projects. Bhakra Nagar Dam was one of the good examples for this. We had steel projects coming up, fertilizers, better agriculture that was seen. Also, there was a kind of propensity for trickle down. So, whatever benefits were there were slowly and gradually percolating to the poorest sections of the society. The idea was to reduce the inequality in the society, and this could be achieved by bringing in more employment opportunities, more job growth, talking about better standard of living, better healthcare facilities, better educational facilities, establishment of advanced educational institutions, establishment of IITs. So those were some of the basic ideas to lay forward the pace of development in a nation. But these developmental models had their own constraints. The first constraint was the financial constraint, and that was the debt. When the country got independent, be it any country across the world, they were struck with a kind of huge financial constraints, and they could only put a small amount to the developmental projects for the upliftment of the society. The second was the social cost. Social cost was mainly in the form of displacement of the people, loss of livelihood, loss of local traditions that were seen, loss of culture. So if we talk about any big project in India, let's take Narmada Bachao Andolan. This project was laid down when the height of the Sardar Sarovar Dam was being raised, and this dam was crucial for electricity, irrigation, agriculture, indeed. But at the same point, it led to displacement of numerous tribal people, clearing of the forest land, submergence of the land, loss of the livelihood, ecological disturbances that were seen, and all those are part of the social costs that have to be borne up. Similarly, there are environmental costs. Environmental cost comes in the form of, let's say, tsunami of 2004. It destructed a huge amount of mangroves forest in the regions of Sundarban. Global warming destructs the submergence of the islands. So Parli 2 island in Lakshadweep recently submerged as a result of global warming. You have coral bleaching that takes place. So you have the coral reef, the Great Barrier Reef of Australia, where we have seen imminent episodes of coral bleaching because of global warming, higher amount of floods coming in, submergence of the coastal areas taking place. So all of those are the economic costs that have to be borne up. Similarly, air pollution, traffic issues, traffic congestion, loss of forest area, loss of land, higher amount of energy use, switching from renewable to non-renewable is another from non-renewable to renewable is another important need of the hour, because the non-renewable sources of energy would be exhausted very soon. So what we need to do is to immediately switch to the renewable sources of energy. So looking forward towards that aspect is very, very important. So whenever we talk about the criticism under the development model, we can classify those under economic cost, social cost, and environmental cost that one has to bear. Similarly, there was a very good movement which was known as environmentalism. As the name suggests, the idea of environmentalism is we have to be in harmony, in rhythm with the ecosystem. Recently, there was a case where monkeys in Himachal Pradesh have been declared as vermin. Now, if this is the case, we are not living in harmony with the nature, and environmentalists speak that we should not manipulate the nature in order to serve our best interest. So, managing waste, managing pollution, managing kind of sustainable development, protecting the endangered species, the IUCN classification in that regard is very, very important. Soon after the industrialization in 19th century, it was realized that conserving environment should be a very high priority. So we had organizations like World Wildlife Fund, Greenpeace that started to come up. In India, you had the Chipko movement. Now, Chipko movement was a simple movement which talked about hugging the trees, protecting the trees from being destructed or cut down. A very interesting movement was laid down by Ken Saro-Wiwa. He was an author, journalist and a TV producer laid back in 1980s. And what he took was the idea that the oil exploration that is coming in the regions of Africa are basically affecting the environment. Not only affecting the environment, they are bringing in a culture of corruption, and that was one of the sole ideas that Viva was trying to bring forward. As a result, there was a kind of murder case that was plotted against him, and finally he was sentenced to death. There were numerous protests worldwide in order to take this issue further, but there have been people who have been working for conservation of environment. So Ongi tribe was one of the tribe that was severely affected because of this oil exploration drive that took place in that region. And Viva was one of the persons who represented the Ongi tribe in Nigeria, focused onto the environmental problems, corruption issues, and brought this forward across the globe. So he had a lot of support that he was able to gather worldwide. Now, how do we assess the development? How can I say whether a region is developed or not? If I say a region or a country has a lot of cell phone consumption, a very good internet connectivity, is it development? So development does not simply talk about high rate of economic growth, but moreover, it talks about a fairer distribution of goods and services. So whenever I say development, it's not just economic growth. It's not just economic growth in numbers in GDP, but it's life expectancy, its education levels, its maternal mortality rate, its basic healthcare infrastructure. So quality of life is much beyond the economic growth. And when we talk about development, we focus on reducing the poverty, focusing on economic growth, focusing on the quality of life. For that, what is the first requirement? The first requirement we have is a basic needs approach, which says that all the basic needs of food, clothing and shelter must be fulfilled, and only then we can think about freedom from wants or freedom from deprivation. To work effectively, we have to follow one's own desire, follow a kind of better approach where we could go for a developmental perspective. So what are the alternative conceptions to the development that take place? The first is the distribution of the cost and the benefits must be equated. As of now, we have unequal distribution of cost and benefit. We also have to lay down strategy. So it could be either top-bottom approach or top-down approach or bottom-up approach. So implementation of the project must be very, very particular. We must be very, very specific about the political leaderships coming in and the implementation of the rule in such a fashion that the rights are maintained, equality is maintained, there is democracy that is not affected, and justice is maintained. So benefits are, as of now, we could say, if there is no proper development, benefits remain cornered to the rich and the powerful section, and the poorest and the vulnerable groups are exposed to ecological destruction. They are exposed to problems of displacement, problems of loss of livelihood, loss of traditional culture, loss of the traditional skills that are there. So that's where we need to have a balance between the present and the future. So focusing on the resources which are being cornered down by the rich and the powerful, and the problems that are being exposed to the poorest and the vulnerable groups must be adjusted at some point. For this, we need to have a democratic participation. As we said, development definitely occurs, be it a democratic government or be it a dictatorial government, but the intentions are very, very different. In a democratic government, it's right of the people to participate. People willingly participate. However, in a dictatorship, they have to participate. So that's the basic difference. So it's one is by wish, one is by a kind of feeling that comes from an inner end. The other is by force, we could say. Similarly, a decentralized approach is very, very important. So when we have a decentralized approach to development, we have the traditional and the modern technologies that come in line, and therefore all the policy formulations work in that line. So the last thing that we need to focus on is an alternative model to development. Now, what is an alternative model to development? The alternative model to development focuses on that we are trying to move away from the higher costs that are being accrued, the ecologically wasteful issues that are there, the technological driven issues that are there, and we are not just counting, as we said, on the economic perspective, but on a better quality of life. Along with that, we focus on nature or environment. So conserving the nature around us, using renewable sources of energy, solar energy, wind energy, tidal energy are some of the 4 types of energy that we focus on. Focusing more on organic waste, talking about more people involvement. We talked about Bhakra Nagal Dam as one of the examples, Sardar Sarovar Dam as one of the examples, but the opponents who are speaking against these focus on a series of small dams, a series of check dams that could be built, small bunds that could be built, and these would lead to minimum displacement of the people, maximum water recharge or ground recharge that could take place, and therefore it could benefit the local people at the local level. So when we say grassroots level development, this is what we tend to achieve. So all those alternative models of development focus on grassroots level development. Mayandong is a classic example in Meghalaya, where we say it's one of the cleanest villages in Asia. Now, how does this happen? This happens at a grassroots level. Once this happens or comes true at a grassroots level, you get spread the same idea at a upper level. So we can have a bottom-up approach to development. Also, we are talking about alternative lifestyle that could be seen, and that comes by bringing in more freedom, bringing in more creativity among the people, and working for a kind of equitable, sustainable development that could take place. So those are some of the basic ideas that we focus under alternative form of development. So this was one of the last chapters under political science, class 11, that we have talked about, the second part of the session. So we would be continuing on many more lectures in NCERTs. Stay tuned. Have a wonderful day ahead.